Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I just hope you're doing incredibly well. Go and get yourself something lovely to drink. I've got an icy glass of lemonade with me that I'm thoroughly enjoying, and maybe you want something warm if the weather is cooler where you are. But whatever it is, go and get yourself something special to drink, because we're on part 3 of our story, and it's starting to get very exciting, because this is about a story that happened in a hollow in Appalachia, and it's very, very exciting. So before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 3 of our story tonight. But of course you're managing without Nina around. I can see you're resourcefully independent. Always have been, haven't you, Russell? Said my mother. I'm just saying it's not easy not having her around. Her lively personality, I mean. And her wonderful sense of humour. Besides anything else, she always pops around to us to have tea with us, doesn't she, kids? And I'm missing her. So I can't imagine what it must feel like for you as her husband. At that, Mr. Montgomery didn't say much. The silence around the dinner table became even more uncomfortable, especially when you have no idea what to say next, and my mother was really struggling. So how is business these days for you, Russell? My mother asked again, trying her level best to find something else to talk about, to break the ominous silence. Perhaps it was below the belt to talk about Nina Montgomery to her husband, especially as she wasn't around, for he was a private man. But getting anything out of him was quite literally like sucking blood out of a stone. It wasn't pleasant. I keep myself busy, said Russell. Well, I'm glad to hear it. It's always important to be busy, said my mother. What projects have you been doing of late, if you don't mind my asking? Cabinetry. How lovely! There's nothing like good cabinetry, especially in a kitchen. Nina says you're very good with your hands, Russell. So you must be very useful to have around. Let's just say when Mr. Montgomery had finished dinner with us and left the house, my mother looked at us with a wilted expression on her face. Goodness gracious! Oh, that was tough going. That man is insufferable, she said with a defeated sigh. Russell really is a lone wolf, isn't he? Nina wasn't joking about that. I thought I was going to have to pull my hair out in exasperation, because the man didn't have a word to say for himself. I was trying my hardest to think of something ingenious to say. At times it was painfully quiet around the dinner table, but when Nina's here, the conversation just flows so effortlessly. She is the most extraordinary storyteller, is she not? She sure is, said my father. It is extraordinary how those two ever got together, if you ask me. But then I suppose they do say opposites attract. I dare say Nina sees something in Russell the rest of us fail to see. I mean, look at Nina, so full of life, so radiant, whereas Russell, he's about as exciting as watching paint dry. I know that's a cruel thing to say, but it's what I really feel. He's hardly riveting company, is he? I don't think a dinner in this home has ever been so long-winded. I didn't even want to play my guitar afterwards so that we could sing together. I hate to say this to you, love, but I wanted him to leave so badly. Things became increasingly awkward by the second, and I could see the kids weren't enjoying themselves either. Awkward is an understatement, my mother admitted. When that man comes to dinner with us, and Nina is at his side, you forget he's even there, don't you? But on his own, he makes for miserable company. I don't feel as bad about taking Nina's generous money now, as let me tell you, entertaining Russell Montgomery is not for the faint-hearted. It's genuinely hard work. And I think if tonight is anything to go by, it's going to be the hardest job of my lifetime looking out for that man while Nina is away. I agree with you wholeheartedly, said my father. You've earned every penny of the money she gave you, so don't you dare feel guilty about accepting it. You deserve it. I still feel so sorry for that man, my mother admitted. I mean, he didn't go to Boston to see his children. and I think that's an awful pity. I wish he wasn't so intimidated by large cities like that. I think he could have had a really enjoyable time if he'd gone. He's staying in that house all alone without Nina around. And even if he enjoys his own company and is sufficiently independent, it's still got to be hell of a lonely for him. That's what I say. Of course it's lonely for him. I do sympathise with him, although I still believe he's a dreadful bore. My father agreed. The following morning, after me and my sister had been climbing trees outdoors, we began to feel hungry. We entered our home, smelling cinnamon and spices on the wind, and my mouth watered as I realised my mother had made my favourite cinnamon buns. We drooled as we entered the kitchen, eager to get our hands on a sticky bun, but my mother smacked our meandering fingers away before we could pick away at the baking tray of buns that were generously slathered with a thick white creamy frosting. I was drooling at this point like a hungry dog longing for a bone, as not even the corner bakery in town could rival my mother's cinnamon buns. "Not now," my mother said. "I have a job for you to do." We watched my mother pack up a basket, lined with a red and white checked cloth. She put meatloaf into a Tupperware container, along with some coleslaw and thick slices of ham. She also put in a bottle of peaches and some homemade preserves, as well as some of the cinnamon buns she had just baked. "I want you to take this lot to Mr. Montgomery," she told us. "I think if I make him some food, he can eat at home. We don't have to have him eating at our house every night then. I don't think he enjoys socializing very much. So I'm sure that he's going to enjoy eating this on his own. Anyway, this is our way of looking out for his nutritional needs, without having to entertain him all the time." My mother waved a finger at us. "And don't you dare go eating any of Mr. Montgomery's cinnamon buns, or picking at the icing. I know what you kids are like. I'll have some cinnamon buns for you to enjoy when you get back, but that's what it's going to be. You need to deliver this first." "But what if he's not in?" I asked. "He works as a carpenter, doesn't he? He could be out working, doing some of his cabinetry." "Good point, Randall. I hadn't actually thought of that," said my mother, wiping away the sweat that had gathered on her brow. The kitchen was steaming. "Well, if he's not there, just leave it on the front doorstep, where he's sure to find it when he gets back home. I'll write him a note." My mother pulled out a piece of paper and scribbled a note. "Russell, I've been baking this morning. Thought you might enjoy some of my cinnamon buns. Nina always says you enjoy them. There's also some food for your dinner tonight. I hope it pleases you. Harriet." As I was the oldest, I instinctively took the basket my mother had handed me, and me and my sister Bethany took the shortcut through the labyrinth of trees to get to Mr. Montgomery's house. We would spend a lot of time playing in the woods. It was to us a home from home, as is the case for most kids that grew up in the Appalachia area. Some that were so poor at the time, they might even be playing around the woods bare feet. But me and my sister were fortunate enough to always have shoes. Over the years in Appalachia there have been stories about strange things happening in the woods in these parts, but never once had me or my sister Bethany ever experienced anything paradoxical or outer-worldly, so to speak. So the stories we sometimes heard about, or the superstitions that abounded, that were often expressed by some of the locals in these parts, seemed to us to be like pie in the sky, almost as if someone had creatively, in a moment of boredom, made up these spurious stories to inspire an eager audience longing to feast on some entertainment. Don't get me wrong, I love a good story myself from an entertainment perspective, but I never believed any of the wild claims people made of seeing strange lights and shadowy figures to be remotely true, but I wanted to believe there was some truth to them. My sister Bethany, on the other hand, had believed every single story she heard. She was extremely gullible that way, and was convinced that at night the woods in our part of the world became like an open portal to the undead, and that such entities would aimlessly wander and roam around the woods at the dead of night, disappearing before the morning broke. Mrs. Montgomery once told us around the dinner table in our home that the woods in this part of the world are reputed to being haunted, and that she believed unequivocally she had encountered a ghost at one time. Everyone had stopped eating as Mrs. Montgomery told us her riveting story, with every eye pinned on her. Mrs. Montgomery had a marvellous way of holding your attention, like no one I'd ever known. My mother used to joke that she had missed her calling in life, because she was obviously meant to be an actress, for I never knew anyone who could hold my attention quite like she did. "Oh, don't look so surprised," she had said to both of my parents, fixing her eyes very sternly on my father, as the cynicism dappled his face, which Mrs. Montgomery seemed determined to challenge. "Oh, look at you, Rolf. You look so cynical. Don't tell me you haven't heard about some of the strange, unorthodox things that have happened in these parts over the years. I'll have you know that Appalachia is a hive of paranormal activity, and the woods in these parts unabashedly invite all kinds of strange things into their midst. Over the years I've heard of the little people, of gremlins, of gnomes, of dark shadowy beings, and the list goes on and on, I have to say." "Are you perhaps pulling our legs, Nina?" my father asked her. "I'm not sure I believe in ghosts or gremlins. The idea is ridiculous." "This isn't a joke, Rolf," said Mrs. Montgomery. "Honestly, what are you like? I would expect someone like you to be open-minded about these things. You work in those mine shafts, for goodness sake, and my bet is you must have experienced some things there." "You've seen a ghost?" I asked Mrs. Montgomery, my jaw dropping open. "For real?" "Well, I believe so," said Mrs. Montgomery. "Don't look so surprised, Randall. You're almost as bad as your father. Are you telling me that you've never been in the woods, when you play there all the time with your sister Bethany? When things have felt off for you? When everything goes very quiet, unnervingly so? The birds stop singing, and you feel watched. Many people around here have experienced such things. The woods in these parts are a hive of paranormal activity. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. I've known this for a long time, as do many of the locals living in this area, who have themselves experienced phenomenon that they cannot explain, that can only be paranormal." "It's happened a few times, Mrs. Montgomery, when it's been weird in the woods for us. Dad says it means there must be a predator around, and that we should leave the woods at once, because we could be in danger. He says it's the woods' way of warning us that something is amiss. Isn't that right, Dad? That's what you tell us all the time." "That's right, son, I do indeed. I'm very glad you've been listening to me. Your father is absolutely right on this, Randall," said Mrs. Montgomery approvingly. "You should definitely leave the woods when you feel disturbed and uneasy, and everything goes strangely quiet for you. But I'm warning you, not all predators are animals, as you may think. There can be other things in the woods that bring on feelings of terror, things we can't even begin to comprehend with our minds. I certainly felt very shaky after my encounter with a ghost. Even now thinking about it makes me tremble in my boots. Sometimes looking back, I doubt what I saw. I think it's our instinctive way of protecting ourselves, when we want to pretend to ourselves that it never happened, when it actually did." "When did it happen to you?" my mother asked Nina. "It must have been about 10 years ago," said Mrs. Montgomery. "Yes, that's right, it was about 10 years ago." She turned around to her husband Russell, who was sitting next to her, and said, "Remember, Russell, when I told you about the ghostly encounter I had in the woods? You didn't believe me, did you? Until you saw the ghost yourself. You saw it, didn't you, dear?" Mr. Montgomery mumbled, "Yes, it was a ghost." And that was all that came out of his mouth. But 2 witnesses to a ghostly apparition, in my opinion, was fierce evidence. It made the story all the more credible, and I was curiously intrigued as to what Mrs. Montgomery was telling us. I was also hoping that if paranormal things did happen in the woods, that I'd get to have an experience all of my own. Little did I know that you need to be careful what you wish for, because it might just happen. "So what happened, Nina?" my mother asked curiously. I can't believe you never told me this. We've known each other for years. And you never even gave the subject a mention. You know I'm fascinated by stuff like this. Well, I don't talk about it because I wasn't sure that you'd believe me. I didn't like talking about the subject either. It makes me very uneasy just thinking about it. Besides anything else, I often doubted what had happened. So if I doubted my own eyes, how could I expect you to believe my account? Some things that happen to you can be so strange, so out of the ordinary, so exceptional, that you're left pinching yourself, asking yourself if that really happened. I suppose that makes some kind of sense, my mother agreed. I still wish you'd told me, Nina. Anyway, go on with your story, because in case you haven't noticed, you have everybody's undivided attention around this dinner table tonight. Everybody appears to have stopped eating, which is a first, I have to say. It was just like any other day, wasn't it? Said Mrs. Montgomery. You were around living next door to us. If you remember, I had a black Labrador called Olive. Such a good dog he was. Never barked, never made a raucous commotion. When Russell was out at work, I had Olive for company. He was a devotedly loyal dog, extremely well behaved. And it was good to have a dog that didn't yap all the time, let me tell you. Oh, I remember him, my mother said. Olive was one of the most well-behaved dogs I've ever encountered. He always listened to you, Nina, never leaving your side for a second. I remember you refused to replace him. Once he died, that was it for you. You couldn't bring yourself to getting another dog. A tear trickled down Mrs. Montgomery's cheeks, which she quickly brushed away. Well, I never got over Olive when he died. He was the best friend to me in every way. Russell wanted me to get another dog. But when I lost Olive, I couldn't replace him. It was impossible for me. I got him from a shelter, you know. He was so grateful that I rescued him, as if he knew I'd saved his life. One day I was in the house doing some washing, and that was when I heard Olive barking. I thought someone else's dog was making a commotion, only because Olive never barked. And even when people visited, he never made a noise. But on this occasion he went ballistic, running up and down the yard, staring in the trees, as if something had got his undivided attention. At the time I briefly glanced out of the window, and that was when I saw Olive barking furiously, his tail wagging. It was as if he was seeing something that I couldn't physically see. He was a well-behaved dog, so he never ran into the woods without me at his side. My curiosity was aroused, as Olive would never just bark at nothing. I absolutely knew that. I remember thinking to myself that something had to be out there for Olive to have reacted like this. So I instinctively left the house, feeling rather intrigued, I have to say, and scanned the tree line. When I saw nothing there, I cautiously walked through the trees, with Olive at my side. And that was when I saw him. Nothing prepared me for what I was seeing. A man was running at record speed through the trees. I certainly never seen the likes of him before. But the way he dressed was very old-fashioned. Nobody dresses like that today. His face was as white as a sheet. There was panic in his eyes, a terrified look on his face, and there was blood spattered all over his shirt, which was ripped apart, as if all the buttons had just come off at once. The shirt was violently torn up, and hanging off his body in strips, I should say. And that was when I noticed that there was these deep embedded scratches running down his torso. Terrifying they were. And there was blood pooling from his left arm, which he was clutching with his right hand. And that was when I realized that he was missing most of his arm. And his hand, of course. The sleeve was ripped short at the shoulder area. The gnarled skin was hanging over the bone. The injury was so severe, it made me want to faint. It looked like he'd been bitten by a savagely ferocious wild animal, or had some kind of macabre accident. The man ran past me. I called out to him, but he ignored me. He'd stopped for a while, you see, when he nearly tripped over something, and that was when I was able to take him all in. I thought he was in shock, because when something bad like that happens to a person, they begin to panic, do they not? Or when you go into shock, you can become bemused, so much so that everything going on around you becomes almost obsolete. I ran after him because I knew if he bled out, he would surely die. And that was what was going to happen, because that severed arm needed attending to before it was too late. The man looked behind his shoulders briefly, wearing a look of unbridled terror on his face, so much so that I began to wonder if something dangerous was in our path that could potentially come after me as well. In that moment I not only felt his terror, but I became absolutely petrified myself. The woods that day were benign, birds cheerfully singing, everything incredibly peaceful. The atmosphere was not ominous at all. It wasn't the kind of atmosphere you would expect if a predator were around. The man definitely looked as if he thought something was chasing him, and that he was trying to get away from something dangerously predatory. At this point my heart was pounding through my chest at one mighty speed, I have to say. It was so bad I thought I'd have a heart attack. I couldn't see anything running after the man, so I was sure whatever had been chasing after him must have long since lost interest in him. The woodgrove can easily pick up danger, and if there was something threatening around, I would have been able to sense it. I watched the terrified man bolt towards a tree, where he scrambled awkwardly up the branches. He must have been pretty nimble on his feet, because he managed to get up that tree with one arm and two legs. I couldn't do it myself with two arms, but he managed to do it with a wound that was quite dreadful. Maybe he was on an adrenaline high, which often kicks in when you're in dangerous situations, where people can accomplish amazing feats in situations where their life is threatened. It's the adrenal response, I believe. When I realized the man was not being pursued by anything, I quickly ran over to the tree and called up to him. I said, "Nothing is chasing you, sir. You can come down now." There was no response, of course. I said, "Hello, can you hear me? What is your name? Tell me your name. I know you must be in shock, but I'm here to help you." But there was no reply. I looked up the tree, and there was nothing there. I'm telling you, there was nothing. I thought I was going completely mad, as only moments before I had watched him myself scrambling up that tree. But it seemed like he had dissipated into thin air. There were no bloody marks on the tree, no speckles of blood on any of the plants. It was all peculiar, very peculiar. "Nothing was there?" asked my mother. "No, nothing," said Mrs. Montgomery. "As I was telling you, there were no droplets of blood on the ground. The man wasn't in the tree where he'd taken cover, but I'm telling you I saw him, Harriet, with my own eyes. He was as lifelike and as real as you and me are. So what I was seeing seemed utterly real. When you see something you know was there and you cannot find it anymore, you definitely think you're losing your mind. I searched the woods high and low for that man, because he couldn't have got very far with an injury like that. I mean, his arm was amputated, bleeding out furiously. It was enough to have killed him. I returned to the tree, and that was when I noticed near this tree was a stone embedded in the ground, like a memorial stone. It said Lucas Perrin, 1849. I'd never seen a stone like this in the woods before, but I didn't think anything of it until I went to see one of the oldest men living in the hollow, Edward Shackle himself, who at the best of times can sometimes have a very vague memory. But I thought that if anyone might know the story behind that memorial stone that I'd found under the tree, it might be him. I asked him if he'd ever heard of a man called Lucas Perrin before, who had died in 1845. I told him about the memorial stone I found under the tree. I never told him about the injured man I'd seen, that I was beginning to believe had to have been a ghost, and I had a strange feeling the memorial stone was connected to the man that I had observed. At first Edward Shackle told me he couldn't remember a story about a man called Lucas Perrin, but it seemed the name was troubling him a little, because he said he'd heard the name before. It was familiar to him, and it was beginning to bother him. And then suddenly his eyes lit up like a Christmas tree, and he said that he remembered that there had been a Lucas Perrin, who had lived in the 1800s, who had disappeared one day in the hollow, and a search party had been undertaken to find his whereabouts. One of the members of the search party discovered a trail of blood that led straight to the tree. That was when they found a very unfortunate sight. It was what was left of Lucas Perrin. The only thing they found was his head. The eye area was gouged out, so there were empty hollows in his orbital cavities. The rest of his body had disappeared, and I'm sad to say his remains were never found. The search party discovered deep scratches gouged into the trunk of the tree that were done by something that had brute strength, but no one knew what it could have been, because those marks certainly did not come from a bear, but something extremely powerful. When Edward Shackle remembered that story, everything came back to him in a flood of memories. He told me that over the years, stories like this have been passed down over the generations in Appalachia. After he told me this specific story, I knew the man that I'd seen running through the woods covered in blood, wearing a ripped shirt with a missing arm, had to be Mr. Perrin, the same man on the memorial stone. Mr. Shackle told me that many unorthodox strange things have happened in the woods in these parts that can't be explained. I believe whatever this thing was that attacked Lucas Perrin, I believe the creature that attacked Mr. Perrin gouged his chest first. There were dreadful scratch marks all down his torso. I remember that vividly. It tore away at his arm, and I imagine went off to eat the arm, knowing very well his quarry couldn't get away very far with a severe injury like that, so there was no need for it to give Mr. Perrin chase. After the creature had finished its aperitifs in the form of Mr. Perrin's arm, it followed the droplets of blood and Mr. Perrin's body smell, locating him hiding up in a tree. Then it climbed up the tree to retrieve the body, which it dragged away, leaving the head of Mr. Perrin in the tree as some kind of trophy. All I can hope is that by the time it crawled up to the tree that Mr. Perrin was already dead, so he didn't have to suffer any more agonizing pain. According to the search party, they found a very distinctive paw print beneath the tree. It was giant in size. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. They'd never seen anything like that before, ever in their lives. So they had no idea what it was that attacked Mr. Perrin, but they believed it was something canine in origin. "Good Lord," said my mother. "What a horrifying story. I wonder what it was that could have attacked poor Mr. Perrin. Is that memorial stone still in the woods by any chance? I can't say I've ever seen it myself." "Yes, of course it's there," said Mrs. Montgomery, "but I suspect it's buried beneath piles of dense ground cover, foliage, pine needles, that sort of thing. I can't remember where it is now, or I'd point it out to you. Things can get lost in the woods, and one tree can look like another." My mother's expression was one of unbridled awe. I could see she was fascinated and intrigued by the story Nina Montgomery had told us, as much as I was, and clearly wanted to savour over every detail, especially as it had happened in our woodgrove. "I understand from what Nina is saying here, Russell, that you also saw the ghost of Mr. Perrin," said my mother, turning her attention away from Nina to Mr. Montgomery, who mumbled, "Yes, I saw him. As my wife described to you, his arm was missing on one side. He was bleeding badly. His shirt was ripped." "Oh, Russell saw it all right," interjected Mrs. Montgomery, rescuing her husband from having to go into much detail. "Russell came rushing over to me. He told me we needed to call for help at once. He'd seen a man running into the woods with an amputated arm that was badly bleeding. I told him he'd seen the ghost of Mr. Perrin, and the scene of Mr. Perrin's last moments, when he was being chased by something. that was being played out in our time-space. Russell needed to be reassured by all of this, because Mr. Perrin looked so real. So we went together to search the woods for the man, but of course there was nothing there. Mrs. Montgomery sighed for a moment and said, "I'm very glad to say that we haven't seen Mr. Perrin again. Well, his ghost, I mean. Let me tell you, seeing a man in such a dreadful state was distressing indeed. And it was so graphically real, you have no idea. I like to think that the ghost of Mr. Perrin has finally come to terms with his tragic demise, and has crossed over to the light. I certainly hope that is the case. Sometimes when people die a tragic death, the way that Mr. Perrin died, I am told they often stay around their body, sometimes hanging around the place where they died so tragically for centuries. It's tragic to think of it, I have to say." Mrs. Montgomery had told me and my sister Bethany many exciting stories over the years about strange things that had happened here in Appalachia. To tell you the truth, I'd almost forgotten the story about Mr. Perrin. On the day me and Bethany were dropping off a picnic basket to Mr. Montgomery, it was a beautiful, prepossessing morning, unblemished by the sheer majesty of the woods that welcomed us warmly, as if we belonged there as much as they did. The canopy of lofty trees stood together like a dishevelled battalion of scruffy-looking men that boasted leafy green heads that were wild and unkempt, badly needing some serious grooming. It would seem that any trespassing light that dared to plunge its way through the canopy met up with some challenges, as the sky above our heads was awash with veils of green leaves, so the faint prisms of light that danced through the grove was very scattered. I loved walking through the woods like this. I never tired of the experience, for to me the woods were like a magical subterranean oasis, where me and my sister could escape at will to indulge our childhood fantasies and inspire our greedy but fertile imaginations. There were several paths through the trees, but the narrow path that led to the Montgomery house would take mere minutes to get there, even though the woods themselves stretched out for many miles. I'd always wondered why me and my sister Bethany had never been privy to any strange experiences of our own, as many locals talked about idiosyncratic things that happened in Appalachia, where they would experience events they couldn't explain. But nothing like that had happened to me and Bethany. We had, of course, had moments in our lives when we had experienced the woods growing silent for a while, and we'd been overcome with an unnerving, disquieting feeling of being watched. But that is not as uncommon as you may think. We had often looked in the woods for the imprints of small people, because the very idea that these mischievous little people could live among us delighted our senses, even though the cynical side of myself tried to sabotage such creative indulgences. I longed to encounter such paradoxical things that people in Appalachia talked about. But despite me and my sister's earnest searches through the woods, we never found anything to suggest that they may be alive with enigmatic mysteries from which answers could never be found. I did wonder privately if Mrs. Montgomery had made the story up about Mr. Perrin, just to be entertaining, of course. I was pondering this, as for some bizarre reason, the long-since forgotten story of Mr. Perrin, that had been gathering cobwebs in the back of my mind, suddenly came back to me in a blaze of bright memories, and in my mind's eye I could almost see that poor man running through the woods with terror written all over his face, as he was being hotly pursued by some horrifying predator. I shuddered for a brief moment, wondering why it was that my mind had brought the story of Mr. Perrin back into focus, especially as I'd long since forgotten about it. I hadn't thought about the man for an absolute age. I held the basket of goodies in my hand as me and my sister Bethany made our way down the path through the trees towards the Montgomery property. I had no idea whether Mr. Montgomery would be in or not, as after they had come into a great deal of money, they had built a garage for their two impressive new trucks. When the Montgomerys had been hard up, they had possessed one rather run-down, heavily rusted truck that had been falling apart at the seams and was permanently parked outside their property, fully exposed to the grueling effects of the elements. In those days you could tell at once if the Montgomerys were around, but not any more. I was clandestinely hoping that Mr. Montgomery was not at home. The man was awkward at the best of times, and I didn't fancy having an interaction with him, as I myself tended to be socially awkward. I told my sister Bethany we would go to the front door and knock, and hand over the basket of goodies to Mr. Montgomery. We would be polite, say hello and then goodbye, and then go home as quickly as we could. If he wasn't there, we could leave the basket at the front step of the wraparound porch, as my mother had told us to do. So there we are, that is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.